Hello, welcome to Brainstorms. We are the podcast for our veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan who struggle with traumatic brain injuries, post-traumatic stress disorder, which is considered to be one of the consequences of being in battle with today's modern technology. We are here for all of our veterans, all of their families, and for the civilian world as well, to teach them a little bit about military service and about that all-important transition from military life to civilian life. We're coming to you from our Sycamore Studios in Plain City, Ohio, and we're brought to you, as always, by a very generous grant from the Fred and June McMurray Association. Their foundation is in Los Angeles, and I think because they are media people, they do understand the power of media to be able to inform, but even more importantly, to lead to understanding, and that's what we're looking for. So in my travels, in my rather long journey now of working with our military members and our veterans, I had one particular mentor that was different than all. Dr. Hemant Thakur, Dr. T, as we call him, is a gentleman who came to the United States from India. When he got here with his orthopedic surgeon's degree, which is a phenomenal degree, and was a practicing orthopedist in India, he was not able to get into any particular training in the United States at that time. And so what he did is, instead of being discouraged, he looked at it as an opportunity, and he went into training and became a psychiatrist. So now you have a very educated gentleman in psychiatry, in orthopedic surgery, and as to add to his service to the United States, he joined the military. Very interesting story. What this particular individual did with all of this put together is to help thousands of military members, of veterans, of their spouses, both through his actions as an Army colonel in theater, in the military, as well as his very large experience in the VA. And he's worked at both the Polytrauma Center in Tampa, Florida, and in Kansas City as well. So he's very well knowledgeable on this, and it's actually world-renowned. Now, here's what we're going to do a little different today. Because Dr. T is almost everywhere, anywhere, all at one time, we are going to be having him give a special talk about his particular ideas for military transition. And this is a brilliant idea, which is mentioned in our book, called the D-Boot Camp. And this is based on the premises. The military is very, very good at training you. Bringing you in, training you, showing you the ropes, going to boot camp is the beginning of your military career. He suggests that the best thing to be transitioned to civilian world is to have an opposite thing at the end of your military service, and that is a D-Boot camp, which is something that would probably vary according to what your military service was, whether you were injured in battle, whether you have any other abnormalities, like in terms of where you are now, and you have to be clear across the country. You have a certain skill set that won't relate well to your family environment. There is nobody doing major computer work, in your hometown, and that's where you want to go. And so in order to make this a smooth transition, it would be up to a, say, 2-week or 4-week or even 4-month program, tailor-made to the military member who will be exiting to the civilian world. It's called the D-Boot Camp idea. We find that to be a very fascinating idea and something that could be very helpful for individuals who have never been in the civilian world. I mean, when we're talking about our all-volunteer military, we're talking about the teenagers who left high school and went into military service. They weren't really in the civilian world. They didn't buy a house. They didn't pay bills. They weren't taking care of a family. All of those things change. So we're going to ask Dr. T to send us his particular ideas in the kinds of presentations that he's given nationwide and worldwide about the idea of D-Boot Camp. Dr. T, take it away.
Good morning, Jessica, and good morning, Dr. Gordon. I'm glad to be here with you and share my experiences, as well as talk about what we can do for the veterans. I came to United States in 1981. I got into residency training at Mount Sinai of New York, and I had excellent training there. And after that, I decided to do a fellowship in consultation liaison psychiatry in Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn, New York. What's interesting here, which relates to how this helped me later on in my life dealing with PTSD, this Maimonides Medical Center was located in a Orthodox Jewish neighborhood, and I ran into several Holocaust survivors from the Nazi concentration camps, and I saw most of them they're functioning pretty well. They're business people, they had jobs, they raised families, they're always caring towards the family and supporting each other meant a lot to them. Okay. And this became useful later on when I was dealing with PTSD and start looking for answers, how come these people survive? But secondly, I was trained there in clinical presentation traumatic brain injury. This is 1986, 87. Most of the people those days did not use the term traumatic brain injury, called something else, but it's the same process. And this became very useful when I joined the VA and I started seeing patients with traumatic brain injury.
Your experience in the PTSD program dealing with thousands of war veterans?
I started to work in a PTSD program at Kansas City VA in early 1991. Okay. Those days, the number of veterans coming to PTSD programs was smaller. They're mostly Second World War veterans. Large number of them were Vietnam War veterans, some Korean War veterans. But as years went by, we started seeing the first Gulf War veterans and then Iraq and Afghanistan War veterans. They came from all walks of life and also socioeconomic status. Had people homeless to millionaires, had people who were high school dropout to people who were very well educated. And as years went by, I actually even seen physicians, nurses, chiropractors, lawyers, business people, people who had worked in all kind of trades. Yeah. They struggled with severe symptoms of PTSD, including they were severely hypervigilant. I learned not to sneak on them from behind because they almost hit you at that time. They react to loud noises. I've actually seen patients hitting the ground when I hear some loud sound. They had severe anxiety, panic attacks when they hit their triggers from war. And most of them had severe PTSD symptoms. They would wake up in the middle of the night with disrupting dreams about traumatic events, and then had difficulty going back to sleep. Many of them, they hit their spouses in a sleep because that's severe hypervigilance. They certainly avoided being in crowded places, and most of them, they isolated themselves, especially the Vietnam War veterans. What was striking about the Vietnam War veterans, they're the most anxious people I've seen in my life. And I used to say to them, I said, I've never seen a bunch of people so angry in my life. Okay? They were severely angry. They did not trust anybody. Many of them thought that I was a half-brothers to the Vietnamese who cut their buddies' throats in Vietnam. Okay? Many of them, they challenged me, they cursed me, and they threatened me. But I never took it personally. Okay? I started realizing that these people have been hurt because the way they were treated when they came back from Vietnam, the way they were treated by the public, the VA, including their family members, their parents, and even siblings, and their other young people who didn't go to war. I felt that I need to do something to help these people to deal with their problems. Okay. Treating PTSD those days was mostly the psychiatrist assess patient for PTSD. Patient also saw a psychologist and a social worker, and we did assessment. The psychiatrist role those days was to give medications like antidepressants for depression, anti-anxiety medications for anxiety, panic attacks, and sleep medications. And most of these patients were asked to attend PTSD groups, and we had several PTSD groups those days. And individual therapy, patients who did not want to participate in group therapy or offered therapy. Okay? And I did all that stuff those days. As time went by, I realized that there's only limited benefit from those things.
What led to come up with innovative treatment approaches?
I was asked to run PTSD groups. We had a social worker who was running this PTSD groups. A husband who was an active duty Army. he was transferred to Germany. And she said, I got to leave the VA because I got to go to my husband to Germany. We didn't have much staff. So my boss asked me to run this PTSD groups. Okay. So I took over these groups for the Vietnam War veterans for PTSD. Okay. What I heard in those groups, veterans were very angry. They complained about all the problems they had. They couldn't keep their marriages. They couldn't get a job. People wouldn't give them a job. There's hypervigilance. They basically, their family member didn't want to deal with that. Many of them, they use alcohol or drugs, and they were very angry. They cursed, they threatened. I heard that for more than a year. At the end of the year, I came to the conclusion, even though these veterans had a place to vent out the anger and frustrations and the problems, they were not getting better. In 1996, the fall of 1996, I just started looking into why some people go through traumatic events, whether it's from war or other adversities in their life, or people who went through Nazi concentration camps and they don't suffer from PTSD, anxiety, and they continue to function. I was going through some personal challenges in my own life at that time. This is in fall of 1996. So I started going to public libraries in the evening after work and started looking for the answers. I started reading all kind of information, trying to study people who've gone through all kind of traumatic events and those from PTSD and anxiety. I came across a book called Man's Search for Meaning, written by Dr. Viktor Frankl. Dr. Viktor Frankl, he was a psychiatrist. He was in a Nazi concentration camps. The Nazis stormed his house, took away everything he possessed. They killed all his family members except his sister. Okay? They took away everything he possessed, including his eyeglasses. As they hurled him on boxcar, they would not even allow him to look at his house. Okay? He was taken to these big warehouses. He witnessed Nazis strip these Jewish people stark naked. They took away everything, including their body here. Would that be traumatic to anybody? Okay. He spent several years in a Nazi concentration camp, and he realized people dying because of hunger because the only food they got is a watery soup with few peas at the bottom and a bread made out of solids. Okay. But he realized there's some people were not losing body weight as fast, and they survived. So he's written a book about his experiences, what made them survive. I studied his strategy and I started teaching that to what I call a crazy Vietnam War veterans on a chalkboard. And those days they didn't like my funny accent, but they kept coming because I have a sense of humor. I can make people laugh when I teach classes. So even though I was teaching very important things, I could make them laugh. They kept coming, and eventually they started saying, you teach more sense than anybody else. Okay. It was mostly a question answer session between me and a bunch of Vietnam War veterans. As time went by, they told me, why don't I teach this first? Why don't I teach this second? Why don't I teach this third? Okay. So eventually we created a sequence. Okay. Again, I was teaching them strategies of people who were gone through all kinds of adversities, including traumatic events in a war or personal life, and continue to function and do well in most aspects of life. I also was studying why some people live long, healthier life without taking much medications. I studied lifestyles of people from blue zones, and I was actually practicing those lifestyles myself, and I started adding that information because many of these Vietnam War veterans had a lot of health problems, okay? How to be healthy without being on a bunch of medications. So for the years, it became a year-long course. It was like about 45 classes. Each classes lasted for about 90 minutes. And it covered every aspect of life, how to improve your life in every aspect, no matter what has happened to you. It was literally like teaching patients how to run your life and your mind the way you want, not let past traumatic events run and ruin your life. I started these classes initially with 3-4 patients. As the word went around, classes grew to 50, 60, 70 patients, and eventually I was running classes with 120 to 140 40 patients a week. We had to divide that into two classes because we couldn't fit them in one classroom. VA eventually built a small auditorium for us to run these classes where I could hold about 70 patients in that small auditorium. Okay. I also started volunteering at the Vietnam Veterans America Chapter 317 in Kansas City and offered these similar classes to the veterans, their family members, and the public. And I did that for about 15 years. Okay. I was running 3 classes a week for close to about 25 years. Okay. And I was able to transform people's life. This is actually even helped and changed my life. All the challenges the Vietnam War veterans put in front of me, all the questions they were asking, and some of them they were skeptical initially, it forced me to start looking for answers for the problems, okay, which I incorporate into classes, okay, and it was actually helped me to transform people's life.
Your VA experience, what did it teach you?
I use least amount of medication in patients. I told them, I says, if you follow what I teach, I can decrease the amount of medication you take. I may be able to take you off some of medications. Okay. So the patients who participate consistently, they're not on much medications. Some of them, I was able to get them off the medications. I literally taught them a step-by-step program how to improve their life holistically in every aspect's life. It covered all aspects of life, okay, including your emotional well-being, your relationship with your spouse, your kids, your other family members, your neighbors, improving your financial situations, how to get educated more, how to enjoy leisure activities, okay, how to hold employment, and eventually how to improve your spiritual aspects of life. Okay. I allow patients to ask many questions, okay, and challenge many times, which literally forced me each time to look for answers, how I can teach them to work on these problems. Okay. I want to share an example of a patient, how his life was totally transformed. His name was James Lewis. I'm not breaking any HIPAA laws because the story was published in Kansas City Star as a full-page story. James Lewis came to us in mid-90s. He was homeless. He was sleeping in cardboard boxes under bridges. He's back as back you can get from Southern Mississippi. He was a Vietnam War veteran, injured, and sent back home. Was diagnosed to have PTSD. He didn't understand what's PTSD. He was selling crack cocaine and pimping women. And he was in and out of jail constantly. If he ever talked to anybody who was sitting in jail, he didn't know how he was that one. Okay? His wife left him. The kids didn't want to do anything with him because of his lifestyle and his anger and his hypervigilance and violence. Okay. I had just started teaching these classes, and James Lewis was one of those patients and one of the 3 patients sitting in the classes. Okay. Now, James Lewis is not the most brightest man, okay, because the another person who's sitting in that class, and I still stay in touch with this patient, he was an engineer, worked for Lockheed Martin, putting a satellite in the sky. Okay. James Lewis picked on some stuff I was teaching, and he actually started applying that to his life. Okay. So this man went from being homeless. I managed to get him in a Penn Valley Community College, and he got a diploma in heating and plumbing, and he got his first legal job. This man had never held a legal job. I had to literally sit down with him and I teach him how to even write a check. He never written a check. Okay. Then he got a second job in addition to that, driving a school bus. Okay. He's basically kept coming classes for many, many years. Eventually, he even brought his girlfriend, who became his fiance, in a class that I was running at Vietnam Veterans America. So this man went from being homeless to later on owning a house with swimming pool and backyard, and eventually got married to this woman. Okay. Kansas City Star came to me. They want to write a story about me because they heard about what I do with veterans. Okay. I truly believe in helping veterans to change their life for better. Okay. I told them, I said, you're writing a story about me. I want you to write a story about him. And they interviewed James Lewis, and the story is published in Kansas City Star. Okay. He used to come to my classes for many years. He came to my classes more than 15, 16 years. And he used to stand in front of patients and say, listen to this man. If he can change my life from where I was being homeless, being in and out of jail constantly, selling crack cocaine and pimping women, okay, he changed my life. If he would not have changed my life, I would have actually killed somebody. Okay. And I was able to do this with hundreds of patients. Okay. His story is one of the worst patients, the person who's homeless, in and out of jail constantly. Okay. After he started coming classes, he never went back to jail. Okay. And eventually started volunteering to help other veterans. Okay. And I truly believe in doing this stuff. Through these classes and this teaching, I got hundreds of Vietnam War veterans in Kansas City to volunteer and network with each other and to create their own support system. Okay. They created a phone list of more than 100 veterans where they had their names, their address, and a phone number, and they wrote what they're good at. Some were carpenters, some were auto mechanics, somebody that worked in an auto dealership, and truck drivers, engineers. Like this patient I was talking about, who was sitting with James Lewis, he knew how to fix computers. This man would purchase a used computers, put it together, and give it away to needy veterans. He donated more than 200 plus computers to veterans, and he would tell them, if you have any problems, I'll fix those, no charge. Okay. And I was able to do this. Okay. I was able to do this. Okay. That I was able to literally improve 1,000 people's lives. Okay. Many of these veterans gone out later on and actually helped over 1,000 war veterans. We managed to get them in a VA, get the VA benefits, make sure they, get them hooked up with primary care providers and other things, but also worked on improving the relationship with the family. Okay. We used to have a Christmas and Thanksgiving dinner, which is open to veterans and the family, and that gathering would bring in about 200, 250 veterans and their spouses and family members to this. Okay. And that is very satisfying for me.
Your military service and what you saw in boot camp, combat, Iraq, and Afghanistan.
I joined the United States Army Reserve in 1993. The reason I joined the United States Army, because I felt this country has given me so much, I got to give back something to this country. And I was willing to die for this country. I joined the Army Reserve in 1993, went through boot camp, and eventually in 9/11 happened and the war broke out, and I was deployed. My first deployment happened with 2 days notice, literally 2 days notice. I got a call in the evening around 5:30, says, Lieutenant Colonel Thakur, you've been called to active duty. I say, where do I report? Says 0800. I said, well, it's 1700. We'll give you a couple of days. I was about on my way to Vietnam Options of America to run a class. I told them, hey, listen, I'm getting deployed, so no more classes for a while. And came back home and told my wife about I'm getting deployed. She still remembers the day. What I saw during my deployment, that there was not much awareness about traumatic brain injury in armed forces. Many of the doctors, nurses did not understand TBI much. Okay. When you go through boot camp, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, they take young men and women, come from all walks of life, including rural areas, inner cities, gangs, rich and poor people, and basically trains them to become a killer or do the job Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps wants them to do. And then they huddle into war. Okay. When we came back, and I had some deployments, my 6th deployment is extended by another year. When he came back, we're basically discharged with about maybe 3 to 5 days out of processing. The first day goes in a medical clearance. Do you have any injuries, any illnesses, and down a clinic. And next 2-3 days is basically a bunch of PowerPoint presentations with bunch of handouts and a phone number. Say if you need something, okay. And we basically discharged from Army. Okay. Now, if you're active duty, You go back to base and you have support system and resources on a base. But if you're a reservist or a National Guard, you go back to your home. And many of these people came from rural areas. They didn't have much access to medical care. Their units may not have medical people to tell them, you know, if they have issues with PTSD, TBI, there's no help available. They would say just go to VA, and some of VA's clinics were not nearby for them. Okay. Also noticed that there's not much awareness about TBI. In fact, when I was sitting in Baghdad, Iraq, in the year 2005, I realized that the physicians, nurses did not understand TBI much. So I actually prepared a presentation and did a presentation to the doctors who worked in a clinic and an ER and the nurses. And literally within a couple of days, I started getting a bunch of patients saying, hey, Colonel T, I think this person may have TBI. And I started seeing a bunch of patients with traumatic brain injury. And this continued for next several years. Okay. Fortunately, it has changed because in 2000, by 2008, Army and DOD and a VA basically decided to mandate all the healthcare providers that they had to go through training for TBI, traumatic brain injury, at least how to identify this. During my last deployment, I was in a leadership role for developing a process to get soldiers from all Reserve and National Guard units through all United States, through all 50 states, how to get them on a medical board. What I saw with the reservist and National Guard soldiers who were diagnosed with PTSD or TBI, when I asked them, what kind of treatment are you getting? They said, well, I see my psychiatrist maybe 3-4 times a year. The appointment lasts about 20 to 30 minutes. He renews my medication. He asks me, am I suicidal, homicidal? And if I'm not suicidal, homicidal, I say, okay. He renews my medications. They want me to go to this CPTPE. I tried that and I couldn't handle that, so I stopped. And I says, okay, where are you living? So I found many of these veterans are living isolated life. Their spouses or kids didn't want to do much with them. Okay. And that was the treatment. Okay. And I noticed that they're not rehabilitated to function back in society the way they were functioning before they went to war. Okay. So when I got back from my last deployment and I decided to do research in a VA to look into what's happening with the Iraq, Afghanistan war veterans throughout the country. Iraq, Afghanistan war veterans who've been diagnosed with PTSD, what's happening with their treatment and outcome.
How did your years of experience as director of PTSD program and treating thousands of veterans with PTSD in classroom settings become utilized to create a model of transition and rehabilitation model at the time of military discharge?
So what I was doing at the VA, I was able to take patients with diagnosed PTSD and or TBI and actually teach them on life, how to improve their life in every aspect of life and function. Okay, I did that for 20, 25 years. As the war broke out, the number of young Iraq, Afghanistan war veterans coming to the VA increased drastically. Our numbers went actually from 600 patients in the program to over 3,000 patients. Okay. Many of these patients were struggling to get some help. As my older veterans, the Vietnam War veterans who've been attending classes, who saw what I do and how that helped them, they basically started saying, hey, Dr. T, you help us to change our life for better. But by the time we got to you, many years ago, okay, we lost our marriages, we couldn't hold a job. Many of us got into alcohol or drugs, and many of us killed ourselves. Okay, I think it may be a good idea for Army, Navy, Air Force to offer you a program when they come back from deployment, right at the end of deployment. Okay, and the idea of D-boot camp, that word came from some Vietnam War veterans. They basically say it's Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps. They train us in a boot camp to become a soldier or a Marine and how to kill people or to do our job the way Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps want to do. But when we come back and then we go to war and we get exposed to all kind of horrific events. But when we come back home, we've not been reprogrammed. Okay? Your program literally teaches you how to deprogram so we can function back in society. And the armed forces should offer this program at the end of deployment when you come back home. And that should be done as a mandatory, because if you leave it to soldiers, that's just not going to happen. Okay? Because if you let them go back home, okay, many of them, they may not come back. This is, I think I'm okay, I'm going to handle this myself. Okay. So this idea of D-boot camp came from a bunch of Vietnam War veterans and older veterans who've been attending my program for many years. What I taught in this program is basically deprogram the returning veterans and to make them resilient despite all the adversities and all the traumatic events they went through life, and actually help them to improve every aspect of life. It was based upon studies of people who went through tragedies, painful events, and war and personal lives, and do not suffer from PTSD, anxiety, depression, hypervigilance, anger problems, or relationship problems. And they continue to function, and they're resilient. Okay? There's a way to train patients like what you do in a boot camp. Okay? You can train them how to run your life and your mind the way you want and not let past traumatic events from war run and ruin your life. And that's what I did in this program. When I talked to a bunch of veterans, we sat down, we basically figured out that even though at the VA, I run this as a 45 sessions, each 90-minute session, 45 total number of sessions over a year, each lasting 90 minutes. We can do this as a D-boot camp in literally 3 weeks. If I do this whole day program for about 8 to 10 hours a day, it's kind of an immersive experience to hands-on training, how to run your life and be resilient despite what happened in war.
Your experience related to current models of treatment of PTSD and TBI.
What I saw with the current model of treatment, again, I worked for the VA for 33 years and retired. Okay? I worked in PTSD program for 25 plus years. Okay? When I came back from my last deployment, I decided to do a research study to look into what's going on nationally. Okay? We pulled data on a 1.4 million war veterans with diagnosis of PTSD and or TBI throughout the United States, going back many years till the day of study, which I think it was about till 2014-15. Okay, the number of veterans who were diagnosed in a VA system with PTSD and or TBI was 1.4 million. Okay, and when we analyzed this data, and we found out that large number of younger Iraq, Afghanistan veterans who are coming back from the war, okay, they're getting increasing disability. They're not being rehabilitated. Yes, they get a diagnosis of PTSD and or TBI. They may see a psychiatrist, and the only treatment they've been offered is see a psychiatrist, CPDP, okay? But there's no effort made to rehabilitate these patients. I asked many of the staff members, I says, does trauma, PTSD, TBI affect all different aspects of life? Does that affect your emotional aspects of life? They say yes. Does that affect your physical aspects of life? There's a massive amount of evidence to show that people with chronic PTSD, TBI, can have multiple physical problems, including they have increased risk of cardiovascular disorder, dementia, and a whole bunch of other things, and a physical illness. Okay? Does that affect their financial status? You bet. Does that affect their relationship with the spouse, the children, the neighbors? My Vietnam wants to say, my neighbor says, stay away from that crazy Vietnam veteran is going to shoot you. Okay? The relationship with the neighbors and even people around them. Okay? Does PTSD affect their ability to enjoy leisure activities? They can't go to movie theaters. They can't go to crowded places. They can't go to their mother-in-law's place for Thanksgiving dinner. They can't go to concerts. They can't go to the kids' football game or baseball game because they can't be in the crowded places. Does that affect their ability to hold a job? Most Vietnam War veterans could not maintain a job. Our Vietnam veterans gone through 30, 40 jobs. Okay? Even though they had skill, they did not have a skill how to keep the job without hurting their boss or people around them. Okay? And eventually, spiritually. The answer to these questions from most staff members, they say yes. I said, does the current treatment of PTSD TBI address any of these issues? The answer is no. Okay, it barely addresses some aspects of emotional well-being, but it doesn't address the physical problems, okay, the financial problems, which is to rehabilitate them so they can go back to work and support themselves. Okay, the relationship with the spouses, children, and neighbors, and fellow citizens, education. Okay, so what I taught in this program, I taught people how to function better in all aspects of their life, no matter what was their baseline. For example, take example of James. Okay, in past, because of his anger and his hypervigilance, nobody could be around. He ended up in a jail. Okay, did he improve emotionally? You bet. Did he improve physically? He changed his eating habits. He started going to his primary care clinic proactively, doing priority medical care. Did that affect his financial status? You bet. He got a job, as a working in heating and air conditioning, as well as school bus driver. His relationships are linked. Not only had a girlfriend who became his fiance, and then he got married to her, his ex-wife and kids came around to see that he's improved. Okay, educationally, he managed to get through community college and got a diploma. He was able to participate in leisure activities. This man started volunteering to help clean up some schools, okay? And he volunteered to teach other veterans, how to get some help in a VA and do better, okay? And spiritual, okay? He basically came to us in a class and he says, if Dr. T would not have helped me with this, I literally would have killed somebody. And if I killed somebody, I would be sitting in a prison. Okay? And guess who's paying for me to sit in prison? The average cost of putting one person in prison is more than $50,000 a year. I worked in Rikers Island before I left New York City. Okay, the cost to put a prisoner in a prison in Rikers Island those days was between $38,000 a year, and that has suddenly increased a lot more. Okay, so he asked me, says, Dr. D, what can I do for you? You changed my life for better. I said, James, there's lots of James out there on the streets, okay, who's selling crack cocaine and will shoot somebody for nothing. If you know how to talk to these young kids who's selling crack cocaine, we can rehab them. If you can get a couple of these kids off the streets, okay, that can save agony to the family members if the kids get shot. Okay, that saves taxpayers $100,000 because if these kids get arrested for shooting somebody, they're going to be sitting in a prison, and taxpayers are going to pay $100,000 to keep them in prison. Okay, so the bottom line is, what's happening in a VA system and DoD, we got to make effort to rehabilitate these veterans. I'm glad Dr. Gordon has put a tremendous effort to recognize these problems and help these veterans in many ways to get some help through her foundation. Okay? We as citizens have a responsibility to take care of the veterans who serve and sacrifice so much for this country so we can go on with our life in the United States. Okay? It is our responsibility to help to rehabilitate them so they can function better in life. If you want to know more about the studies and the information we found out, this study was published in a Federal Practitioner, which is a peer-reviewed journal. Okay. Unfortunately, this article, which got published, came in March of 2020 when there was a lockdown. So the article did not reach a lot of VA and armed forces facilities. This journal actually gets to all the VA facilities, all the VA physicians, as well as Army, Navy, Air Force health facilities. Okay. I also found out the current model, if we continue in this path, it's going to cost the nation more than $1 trillion in the treatment and the disability benefits over a 30-year period. The thing is, if you have a young veteran who's just getting disability and sits home, not functioning, that has a secondary effect on his family, his wife, and the kids. The kids don't see the father's functioning. How can he tell the kid, hey, go and get a job? You're going to face problems in life. You need to see how you can overcome those things and continue to function. Okay? And that needs to be addressed. I'm glad what Dr. Chris and Gordon doing through our foundation to help these veterans.
As far as your model of the boot camp, as it is explained in the book, could you tell me more about that?
Yes. Okay. So what I teach is a system. It can be taught as an immersion program in about 3 weeks in a deep boot camp. Okay. It basically starts with if somebody has figured out how to deal with a problem and succeed, they already have a strategy, a technique, suppose. You can literally train that to other people. And it can be done as what you do in a boot camp. Okay? In boot camp, you take young men and women coming from all over the United States and put them in boot camp and make them a soldier, sailors, marine to do what the Army, Navy, Air Force wants them to do. Okay? You're training a skill. And it's done as an immersive experience in a boot camp. Okay? Same thing can be done in a deep boot camp. Okay? So I created a system to teach how to improve every aspect of life. During my second class, I actually do a workshop for the veterans to identify different aspects of life that they have difficulty with, starting with emotion. Okay, do you have problem with anxiety, depression, anger? Do you have problems being peaceful, calm? Do you have problems being able to be romantic with your wife? Okay, your physical aspects. I go through a whole bunch of details: your weight, your blood pressure, your pulse. You take your cholesterol level, your lipid levels, your blood sugar, hemoglobin A1C, and the preventive care. Okay, uh, your financial aspects. Okay, your relationship, educational aspects, your ability to enjoy these leisure activities. I say identify the problems you have, and I'm going to teach you how to overcome those problems in a systematic way because there's somebody who's gone through similar problems and they still function better. Okay. So that is done over a period of several weeks. Now, if you want to know more details about this program, and I can't talk about all these things in literally 2-3 minutes, the whole program has been published in a book, Innovative Holistic Approaches to PTSD and Life Stress. Okay. This is published by Amazon.com company. Okay. I wrote this book after my patient told me that what you teach makes more sense. Dr. T, you got to put this in a book. I never thought I would be writing a book. If you had told me 35 years ago, I would be writing a book and running these classes, for the last 25 years, that says you're crazy. Okay. So the book is available and the entire program is systematically explained in this book. I'm going to ask Dr. Chris and Gordon to put a link towards this. You can just go to Amazon.com and put my name, Dr. Hemant Thakur, Innovative Holistic Approaches to PTSD, and it'll pop up.
All right, and lastly, how can our guardians and their committees influence politicians and military members to make this happen?
Okay. I'm glad what Dr. Chris and Gordon is doing that through our foundation. It is important that we, as the treater healer, as well as the service members who become aware about what Dr. Chris and Gordon is doing, to make DOD and VA aware that the current model of treatment is not helping to rehabilitate veterans to function better in all aspects of life. Okay, if they can offer a program like a deep boot camp after the veterans or service members come back from deployment, okay, before they basically get discharged from Army, okay, we may prevent this tragedy because the current model doesn't work. In the research study we published, okay, there's a whole bunch of discussion about the shortfalls of current models of treatment. Okay. Dr. Kristen Gordon, in her book, research, this book about guarding our guardians, have explained the numerous problems service members face when they come back, okay, and what can be done. So it has to be a combined effort by the veterans and the treating physicians, our psychiatrists, our psychologists, our social workers say, hey, the current model does not focus on getting these veterans to function well in all aspects of life.
We want to thank you all for listening and watching this taped discussion today. It's something that was so important, I did not want to leave it out, even though between our two schedules, it was very difficult for Dr. T to get to our studio in Plain City, and it was just as difficult for me to get to either Tampa or Kansas City. We would like your comments. Dr. T has been the author of several books that will be listed here as well, and please feel free to contact us at info@resurrectinglives.org if you want more information about this. And thank you all for this particular chance to learn about a new innovative idea that we're hoping the military will embrace in the future. Thank you.
If you are thinking about harming yourself or attempting suicide, tell someone who can help right away. Call 911 for emergency services. Go to the nearest hospital emergency room. Call or text 988 to connect with the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This podcast is made possible thanks to a grant from the Fred and June McMurray Foundation, and it's produced by the Resurrecting Lives Foundation at the Sycamore Studio. Music is written, performed, and graciously provided by Tim Beckley. Remember, when you work toward brain injury recovery, it is best to journey with a friend and keep your gait steady and your spirit strong. Finally, always seek shelter from your storm.
Baghdad, the Basra, the Boston, the Bakersfield. The hottest battle I ever fought is raging inside of me. My brain has been battered, scrambled and rattled, and no one knows what's going on